Holy Gospel is written in the 18th chapter of St. John, beginning at the 33rd verse. Pilate entered the headquarters again, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you ask this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate replied, "I'm not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests have handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not from this world. If my kingdom were for this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here." Pilate asked him, "So you are a king?" And Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." Here is the gospel for the day. Please be seated. When I came to Texas back in 1993, I'd been involved with theater almost all my life, and I wanted to get back and see how I could get involved in theater here. And so one of the things I did was took a course at the junior college on acting, because from those people I could find out how to go about getting involved with the various theaters. And so one of the things I did is gave my name to some of the people who do the casting for the extras that they have on film. A lot of you have been involved in extra work here because we've shot 3 movies here since I've come here. And in 2 of them, a lot of the people were used as extras. When you have a crowd, you need to have a lot of people. And you don't have to say anything or act or do anything else really, except be there and act as if you would be in a regular church service or whatever they're filming. So I was called in one time to be involved with Hope Floats. And when I came there, I expected to be just used as an extra. And they pulled me aside and they said, "We've got a different job for you today." And I said, "What is that?" And they said, "We want you to be an extra." Well, I had no idea what an extra was, but I found out. When they do filming, they have to set up for a scene. And what they do is have the set people there and the cameras, and they set the cameras as if they're going to film the scene. But the actors, the primary actors, are not going to be there because it takes a lot of time, and they want them working on their lines and involved in other things other than the setup. So I was asked to be the extra for the guy that runs the camera shop. And to be an extra, you've got to be about the same height, about the same weight, the same complexion, and look a lot like the person involved, but certainly have the same facial and body features that the person will have in the actual film. So you are serving, and then you set up the scene, and when the scene is all ready to be pictured then or filmed, you step out and the actual film stars, step in. With this in the background, I heard about one of the greatest extras of all time. And it not happened to be in films, it happened to be in royalty. Queen Elizabeth was Queen of England from, I think it was 1952 to 2022. And as Queen, she participates in about 400 social events a year. It can be just meetings, presentations, receptions, charity events, But in 1980, they were filming a national memorial service. She was to be featured in that. And they got ready to set up for the celebration, and they had Queen Elizabeth there, and she got up, and the sun got in her eyes, and it was bothering her, and she wanted somebody to step in for her. And so the person that was filming this National Memorial Day said, is there any in the class that can step in and be an extra, or a stand-in for Queen Elizabeth? And all that they had on the scene were a bunch of men who were 6 feet or taller, and they really didn't fit. And he looked around, and the person who was filming saw a lady by the name of Alice Clark, and she was about the same age and the same texture, skin texture as Queen Elizabeth. As a matter of fact, she looked a lot like her. And so the director went over and picked her up, and he said, can you be a stand-in for Queen Elizabeth? And so she was. And what happened is that from that day, Ella Slack was the stand-in for Queen Elizabeth for 30 years. She was involved in every single reception, everything that Queen Elizabeth was involved in. She did the setup, and then they took her out and filmed. But when they were doing the practicing, she would be in the chariot of the Queen's and riding down the street and waving at the people as if she was the Queen. She said it was a great, great job to have, being a stand-in for the Queen. They said only one thing you can't do. You can't sit on the throne. That's only for the Queen. Now, I understand we're using a woman, but I don't know of any metaphor better for Christ the King Sunday than saying we're stand-ins for Jesus. We celebrate Christ the King. It's the last Sunday of the church year. Next week, we'll be doing Advent, starting a full new church year. But we celebrate Christ the King Sunday to talk about the time when Christ returns and takes dominion over all the earth that he created. And we are preparing that for him. We are his stand-ins. Now, we have a little difficulty with the word king because most of us really are not closely associated with a king. As a matter of fact, during the Revolutionary War, that's one of the things we wanted to get rid of. We don't need a king. And so we have certain different feelings about a king, but mostly he's just a figurehead. He really doesn't have the power. But what word can we use? We can't use president. That's a voted-in position. We certainly don't want to use dictator. And prime minister is not so good, nor master, because that indicates something about slavery. And so we're going to have to use king. But understand that king, as we use it, means regal in the best sense. One who has absolute power, absolute control. That's Christ the King. But even in our gospel text, there's an argument about how we regard this kingship. Pilate is trying to examine Jesus to find out if he thinks he's a king, because that means they're threatening to overthrow the government of Rome. And we certainly don't want that. And he asks Jesus the question, are you the king? And Jesus plays around with it a little bit, but he finally says, I am a king, but my kingdom is not of this world. It's a much different world. One theologian describes the parables of Jesus as talking about the kingdom as imagining a world like. In other words, the great kingdom to come is one in which a rich man throws a party for poor people. You can imagine a kingdom where somebody sees somebody at the side of the road who is an enemy and stops to help. You see the kingdom of God as a father forgiving when his son is disrespectful and leaves. So, we imagine a kingdom to come. And God asks us to be his stand-in to help him prepare for the coming again of Christ. There are a couple of authors who've tried to write about what this meant. One is The Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis. The other, Charles Sheldon's In His Steps, in which that phrase, "What would Jesus do?" came to be used. We are the stand-ins for Christ. But then he also asks us to be his actors. We play his part in this world that we live in. We act as if we are the Christ. Can you imagine that? Have you ever thought of the possibility of having a movie made of your life? Who would you like to play your part? Who would you like the representation to be? And could you accept and believe that the representation they are giving of the kind of person and the way you acted, that you are, without getting upset? If you watch Saturday Night Live, you know, they've all got these impersonations all the time, usually of the presidents. And I don't think the one plays Trump very well, but Rich Little used to be probably the best impersonator of all time. And he could make himself to be exactly whatever character, and it was easy to tell who he was impersonating. He was dead on. Because he studied the persons. He knew their physical gestures. He understood the tone of their voice. And you knew that you were not looking at Rich Little. You were looking at any kind of person he was representing. So Jesus asks us to play his part in today's world. And that gets a little scary. I guess the last big play I did was Give 'Em Hell Harry, which is an hour and a half one-man show on the life of Harry Truman. Harry Truman was a person that I respected because my dad thought he was the best president of the United States we'd ever had. But one of the things we did in preparation was go up to Independence Library, the Harry Truman Library, watch films, and try to get a kind of feel for the character and how he responded to different things so he could do the film well. I had to get used to using language that I never use because Harry had some very flowery language. Some might call it something else. But then they bring in a makeup artist and he makes you up like Harry Truman. And one of the things you do is when you get past the door of the theater, you are no longer yourself, but you are the person you're representing. And so many times I wonder how Harry Truman would think my portrayal of him was. Probably wouldn't have been that great. But here's the question we ask today. As we are imitating Christ, and Christ is looking at us as his stand-ins and the people that are playing his role in today's broken world, how is he looking at you and me?
Is he happy with the presentation that we are making? Playing the part he asked us to play. Christ the King Sunday. Christ has come and he leaves a world that's unfinished. He will come again. And in the meantime, he expects us to be his stand-ins and to play the role. And so as we leave here and operate during the week, as we do our little interactions with each other, we have to ask us, how well are we playing the part? What kind of a stand-in are we? Amen. Sermon hymn, Lord of the Dance, 87. 87. Stand as you are able.